All right, so you found it, that perfect piece of land in Kenya, the one you've been dreaming of. Maybe for your future home, maybe it's a smart investment. You're ready to sign on the dotted line. But hold on just a second. Did you do your homework? And I'm not talking about just a quick glance at the title deed.
Exactly. You've got to go deeper than that. A
Mhm.
title deed, it's really just a snapshot, a glimpse of the present.
Yeah.
To really understand what you're getting into, you need the full story, the land's history. That's where a land ownership history investigation comes in.
This blog post, Unveiling the Truth, the importance of land ownership history investigation, makes it crystal clear. It's a must-do for anyone serious about buying land in Kenya. It really digs deep into what these investigations are, why they're so important, and honestly, it's pretty eye-opening stuff.
It really is. It's like, think about it this way. Would you ever buy a used car without checking its history? See if it's been in any accidents, had any major issues.
No way. I would be checking everything. Kicking the tires, looking under the hood, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. And buying land, that's a huge investment.
Yeah.
Just like that used car, it comes with a past. A land ownership history investigation, it's all about uncovering that history, making sure there are no nasty surprises waiting for you down the road.
Okay, so let's break it down. What exactly does this investigation involve? The blog really stresses that it's way more than just glancing at the current title deed.
Right. It's about tracing the complete ownership history of that land, going way back. And that might mean digging into some really old records. We're talking grants from the colonial era, transfers between previous owners,
Right.
even hand-drawn survey plans, things like that.
Wow, it sounds like real detective work. Dusting off old documents, piecing together who owned what and when.
That's it. And it's not always easy. Sometimes those old records are incomplete, or you might find inconsistencies, names, dates, even the boundaries. This is where experience is really essential. Someone who knows what to look for can spot those red flags right away.
So it's not just about finding the documents, it's about knowing how to read them, interpret them.
Absolutely. Think about it. A change in handwriting on a deed, that could point to a forgery,
Hmm.
or a document missing from that chain of ownership. That could be a sign of a dispute that was never truly settled.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got these historical documents. What else goes into a really thorough investigation?
Well, the blog emphasizes talking to the people who know the land best, the locals.
You mean having conversations with neighbors, people who've lived in the area for a long time, maybe even local authorities?
Exactly. They often hold pieces of the puzzle that you just won't find in any official record. Imagine you're looking at a piece of land and a neighbor mentions that the previous owner always caught up in boundary disputes.
Ooh, yeah. That'd be a big red flag for me. I'd be like, thanks for the heads up. I'm steering clear.
Exactly. Or maybe they remember an old well on the property that isn't on any maps, or a traditional right-of-way that's been there for generations.
It sounds like you're not just reconstructing a paper trail, you're getting the real story, the human side of the land's history.
Exactly. And that human element, it's especially important when you're dealing with inheritance,
Hmm?
which in Kenya can be a bit of a minefield.
Right, because land in Kenya is often passed down through families, which can create some really complex situations.
Absolutely. You could be dealing with multiple heirs. Some might live abroad. Some might not even realize they have a claim to the land. The blog really stresses making sure all the rightful heirs are on board with the sale, especially when customary land practices are involved.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What exactly are customary land practices? And how are they different from, say, the official legal systems?
That's a really important question to consider, especially in the Kenyan context. Customary land law. It's based on traditions, customs, beliefs that have been passed down through generations within communities. These customs, they often determine things like inheritance rights, how the land can be used, even how it can be transferred or sold.
So it's almost like a parallel system of land governance existing alongside the formal legal system.
In a way, yes. And sometimes those customary practices, they might not be fully reflected in official records, legal documents. That's where things can get really tricky. For instance, a community might have customary rights to access water or grazing land on a property,
Yeah.
even if it's not written down in the title deed.
Wow, that adds a whole other layer of complexity. It sounds like understanding these customary practices is crucial to avoid potential conflicts down the line.
Absolutely. That's another key reason why a land ownership history investigation is so essential. It helps uncover those hidden layers, the unwritten rules, the understandings that really govern land ownership in a specific area. It's really navigating two separate worlds, The official legal world and then the world of these customary practices. A good investigation, that's what bridges the gap, gives you that full picture, that complete understanding of the land and its story.
It's like you're not just buying a piece of property, you're becoming a part of its history, its traditions, its community. And that comes with responsibilities, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't want to step on anyone's toes.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're not violating any unwritten agreements, causing any friction because you weren't aware of the local customs.
Right, absolutely. So we've talked about what these investigations are, what they look like, but let's dive into the why. The blog is very clear. Skipping this kind of investigation, it's a recipe for disaster.
And they don't hold back on the reasons why.
Not at all. The first one that really jumps out is the risk of fraudulent sales. The blog just comes right out and says it. Land fraud is a real problem in Kenya. Honestly, that kind of makes my stomach churn a bit.
It's unfortunate, but it's true. And it often catches people who are, eager to get a good deal. Maybe rush into a purchase without doing their due diligence.
So what can people do to protect themselves? Are there any red flags that scream, run, don't walk?
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest ones is a seller who's pushing to close the deal really quickly, especially if they're pushing for a cash sale or maybe offering a price that seems too good to be true.
So the old adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. Another red flag is when the seller avoids giving you documentation or hesitates to give a clear history of who has owned the land.
Like they're dodging questions about past disputes or can't quite remember when they got the land in the first place.
Exactly. Those are major warning signs. And that's where those historical documents we talked about earlier, they become so important. A legitimate seller, they should have no problem showing you a clear line of ownership, tracing it back through the years.
So don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, to really push for transparency.
Exactly. Remember, this is a major investment. You have every right to be thorough, to make sure everything is completely above board.
The blog actually mentions this chilling example of someone who almost bought disputed land in Nairobi. Talk about a close call.
That one really drives home the importance of a professional investigation. The client in that story, they were days away from signing the papers, completely unaware that there were multiple claims on that same piece of land.
That would make my blood run cold just thinking about it. They could have lost everything. So we've got fraudulent sales. What other kind of landmines are out there for buyers to watch out for?
Well, even if you dodge a fraudulent sale, there's always the risk of boundary disputes.
Ooh, yeah, those can get ugly. I've heard some horror stories. Neighbors at war over a few inches of land.
And in Kenya, where land is so often subdivided and passed down through generations, these disputes are pretty common.
So what can you do? I mean, besides hiring a professional surveyor to mark every single inch of the property?
Well, that's not a bad idea. But even before you do that, a good land ownership history investigation will always include a thorough look at the property boundaries.
So they would be comparing the legal descriptions from the title deed to whatever survey plans exist, maybe even old aerial photos if they can find them.
Exactly. And they'll look for any physical evidence on the ground, too. Things like boundary markers, fences, natural features that have been used to define those property lines for years and years.
It's like detective work, but instead of fingerprints, you're looking for fence posts.
Exactly. And sometimes those long-time residents, those neighbors, they can be so helpful. They might remember where the boundaries have always been, even if the official records aren't clear.
So it's really about taking all those clues, the documents, the physical evidence, what the locals know, and putting it all together, creating a clear picture of where one property ends and the next one begins.
Precisely. And that can save you so many headaches, not to mention legal fees further down the line.
Okay, so we've covered fraudulent sales and those tricky boundary disputes. What other reasons does the blog highlight for really investing in a land ownership history investigation?
Well, the next one is something that hits close to home for a lot of Kenyans' inheritance disputes.
Right, because like we were talking about before, land in Kenya often gets passed down through families, which can create this whole web of inheritance claims.
And those claims, they aren't always simple, straightforward. You might have multiple heirs, some living abroad, some who might not even know they have a claim to the land.
Wait, so you could buy a piece of property and then suddenly have long-lost relatives coming out of the woodwork claiming their share?
It's not impossible. And that's exactly why the blog emphasizes that verifying those inheritance claims, it's a crucial part of the investigation.
Oh, so how do you even begin to untangle something like that? It sounds incredibly complex.
It definitely can be. A thorough investigation would involve going through probate records, looking at wills, any agreements that relate to how the land is inherited. You might even have to track down family members and interview them. just to understand the family tree, any claims that might be out there.